All right, getting right to it. We're talking about Josh Primo, the now former San Antonio Spur. He was just recently waived on Friday, and so we're going to talk about this a little bit. You know me, my name is Jamahl Kersey. I am the principal attorney at Kersey Law, boutique criminal defense firm in San Diego, California, and we're talking about this situation in which Josh Primo has allegedly exposed himself to multiple women, including at least one woman who worked for the Spurs organization. And I think the first thing that just stands out to me in this situation is grace and how we need to act with grace and with an attempt to understand versus just the quick response, attempt to jump to conclusions, figure everything out. He has asked for privacy at this time, so doesn't necessarily want to have a mic in front of him answering questions. You know, it'd be my advice as a defense attorney, both on the criminal and civil side, to not provide statements one way or the other. But he wants his privacy, and he deserves that. I mean, this kid's only 19 years old. He has his whole life ahead of him. He has his whole career ahead of him. He beat the odds. Obviously, you know, he made it to the NBA, and that's a huge dream for many young basketball players. And so he did that. But apparently, you know, he has some mental health trauma going on, and we can get to his statement where he says, hey, listen, I know that you are all surprised by today's announcement. And that's, you know, to say the least. This kind of came out of nowhere for everybody, right? I've been seeking help to deal with previous trauma I suffered and will now take this time to focus on my mental health treatment more fully. I hope to be able to discuss these issues in the future so I can help others who have suffered in a similar way. I appreciate privacy at this time. So, you know, he's already issued this statement, or he put out this tweet, and he's talking about, you know, previous trauma. And that could be anything. That could be anything that, you know, he's been going through. And I think, you know, from a mental health standpoint, that's definitely something that we have to respect in terms of his right to privacy, in terms of what he's been dealing with. But he said that he will, you know, possibly be able to come out and discuss these issues in the future. But I really do like that he is taking the time to address this. You know, I want to put all the stock in his statement versus kind of writing it off as sort of a PR response, right? You know, to believe that he really is going through something and is getting help for it. Because, you know, how many times do we hear of a person who has suffered some sort of trauma, but doesn't even understand or recognize or acknowledge that they have a problem, let alone go and get help for it, right? So a lot of times the big barrier or the big obstacle is that the person doesn't even understand or recognize that they have a problem. And then when people do recognize that they have a problem, they're just not willing to seek help to resolve that problem. Or sometimes, unfortunately, we deal with the issue of just lack of resources to deal with a problem, or lack of awareness in terms of going and seeking mental health treatment in order to address one's issues so that they can live a healthy and productive life. And so, again, the allegations that have come out at this point are that there have been multiple alleged instances of him exposing himself to women. And, you know, I can guarantee you that in response to all these, you know, articles and updates on this, there's going to be a whole host of jokes, and he's going to have to, you know, that's just something that he's going to have to deal with. But, you know, taking this seriously from the, you know, the alleged victim's perspective, obviously, you know, you should be able to go to work and not have to deal with having someone expose themselves, you know, to you, right? And so there's that. And then, you know, he should understand that it's not appropriate to expose yourself to people at work or anywhere that's not invited, right? And so there hasn't been any word that this is going to actually, turn into criminal charges, but presumably it could, right? It is, in fact, a crime. It could be a misdemeanor to expose yourself to somebody else in public or to someone who, to whom that would not be invited, right? So compared to obviously a husband-wife situation or even an intimate relationship where you exposing yourself would be invited, to do that to, especially at work to a coworker, that could definitely be a misdemeanor. We haven't received any information or heard that criminal charges are being filed, but that is something that he could potentially be subjected to. But what it sounds like right now is, on some level, one of these women is gearing up for a potential civil suit. It's been released that attorney Tony Busby has been retained by one of these women who works for the Spurs and has said that Primo exposed himself to her. And so this guy, Tony Busby, has actually represented some of the women in the Deshaun Watson situation. So, and we all know that, the civil settlement talks that they've been engaged in, we're talking about in the tens of millions of dollars collectively between those different women who were involved in that case. But one of the major differences between Deshaun Watson's situation and what we know, the little that we know right now about Josh Primo's case is that there's not any sort of allegation of sexual assault, any sort of unwelcome touching or anything like that. We're talking about mere exposure of himself. And, I certainly don't want to minimize that to say that, on some level that wouldn't be harmful or even traumatizing. But, in the continuum of things, exposing yourself compared to sexual assault, touching, forced oral sex or whatever those allegations were, we're not talking about anything like that. And so it does bring up an interesting discussion. What is the value? What are the damages to a woman who, is at work and then, if they both work for the Spurs organization, they're presumably coworkers. And so a male coworker, and, I imagine, and again, we don't know what this woman's position is. So, but if she's one of the staff and obviously Josh Primo is on the team, oftentimes you have that, imbalance of power, right? So there's that dynamic where he's one of the players. She may be, one of the, for lack of a better term, lesser staff. And when you have that imbalance of power, she may have felt like she was in a situation where, she really didn't have a voice in the situation. I don't want to go too far, but, it doesn't really get much higher within the Spurs organization than the actual player on the floor. Right. And so nonetheless, this will end up being an interesting discussion or analysis in terms of what will that ultimately be worth. Being a woman who, had this basketball player expose himself to her. So that's definitely something that, her legal team, Mr. Busby and everybody on his team will be looking at to see, what this is worth so they can get, their demand letter out to him in order to avoid what would potentially be a lawsuit against him. So going back to the discussion about the potential criminal charges that could come from this, I think one positive step in the right direction by Mr. Primo is that he has, or at least it sounds like he has already been seeking to address whatever underlying trauma that he has, because those type of things are really, really useful in negotiations with the district attorney on the topic of trying to convince them not to file charges against a person. And so we at Kersey Law, we deal with this a lot. We deal with a lot of people who either have been arrested or they've been accused or they're under investigation for criminal activity. and they want to do everything that they can to possibly avoid charges being filed against them. And that is a realistic possibility in some cases. But one of the things, if there's not any sort of defense to be able to say that our client did not do what they're being accused of, in other words, if they did do it, right, then we are really making great efforts to try and demonstrate to the DA that there's going to be a less likelihood, or that this thing is never going to happen again. And when the very basis for a person doing what they did is some sort of mental health trauma, then the way we address that is by showing that they are enrolled in psychotherapy, or they're in anger management classes, or they're meeting with the therapist regularly to treat their PTSD, or whatever the underlying trauma is. And the more that we can show that the person takes responsibility for their actions, they take the situation seriously, they're doing what they can to address the issue so it never happens again. If we're then also able to demonstrate a lot of positive information about that person, then, they have discretion. Just because a person committed a crime doesn't mean the district attorney has to file charges against them. And so, contrary to popular belief, all DAs aren't just seeking to, throw people in jail and lose the key. No, I mean, there are plenty of situations where they're able to understand that it probably wouldn't be, very good for society, for that individual, for their family, for this person to be charged with a crime and go to jail. And so that's one thing that we do really well at Kersey Law, is get that information about our clients, tell their story, and put into context, why something happened, and demonstrating why it won't happen again. And we're really able to make great waves with convincing district attorneys not to move forward with charges. And so one of the things that plays into that is the employment situation. And so unfortunately, Josh Primo has already been waived by the Spurs. But one of the things that we do provide in terms of, telling our client's story is about their gainful employment, and how their employment may very well be at risk if they end up being charged with a crime, if they end up going to jail or prison. And that can oftentimes be persuasive, especially if we have an employer who really values that employee, and they're able to say, hey, they're hardworking, they always, they're the first one to show up to work, they're the last to leave, they're always willing to pitch a helping hand, they're a star player on the team, just things like that. Can be really helpful, again, to put into context who this person is and why they deserve some grace, why they deserve an exercise of favorable discretion in order to not have misdemeanor or felony charges filed against them. Now, again, so there hasn't been any indication that that any criminal charges are going to be filed against Mr. Primo. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but there certainly could. And so on the issue of employment, this is oftentimes when people make mistakes due to a lack of judgment like this, there often can be consequences that include the possibility of losing a really good job. And so obviously, being able to play in the NBA for millions of dollars a year is an absolute dream job. But someone's dream job might be, collecting garbage for the city. Someone's dream job might be, serving in our military. Shout out to all our military service members. Someone's dream job might be, a teacher at a junior high school, and, facing criminal charges can put that at risk. And with a person's employment at stake, that's where it becomes really important to have a solid lawyer in your corner, because, they can really help you avoid charges being filed so that you can keep your job, keep your clean record, and stay out of custody. So I'm definitely hoping for the best for this young man. Hope he's able to get this issue behind him and move on with his life as soon as possible. And that's actually going to do it for this video. So if you got something out of this, please show me some love, hit the like button, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and make sure you turn on the notifications so you never miss a new video when it drops. As always, I want to thank you so much for watching, and until next time, peace.